Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Beyond Cleaning Our Room, Responsibilities and Opportunities in Honoring Our Parents as They Age with Rabbi Edward Bernstein. And I want to thank our great partners at BMHBJ in Denver for co-sponsoring today's event and welcome Rabbi Chaitovsky to introduce today's guest speaker.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very important topic, Jewishly and emotionally, and a great mitzvah in the Torah to honor our parents. And our guest speaker, Rabbi Edward Bernstein, is a board certified chaplain, serves as chaplain for Boca Raton Regional Hospital in Florida. He's a podcaster, hosts two podcasts, the NeshamaCast, a podcast exploring Jewish spiritual care, as well. He also hosts My Teacher podcast. He edited Love Finer Than Wine, the writings of Matthew Eisenfeld and Sara, two victims of a terrorist attack in Israel quite a few years ago, a 2016 National Jewish Book Awards finalist. Rabbi Bernstein was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He has been a pulpit rabbi serving congregations in New Rochelle, New York, Beachwood, Ohio, and Boynton Beach, Florida. He's also served on the faculty of Camp Ramah Darom, Moishe House, and the JTS Florida Office. It's a pleasure to introduce my colleague, Rabbi Edward Bernstein. Please give him your undivided attention.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Chaitovsky, for the beautiful introduction. Thank you to Rav Shmuley and Alex and the VBM team. I'm honored to be back at Valley Beit Midrash, and I also want to thank BMHBJ in Denver for being partners in the program. It's good to see some familiar faces from when I've spoken previously in the Zoom room, in the live audience. And I'll note that I myself listen to most of the VBM programs by podcast. And so let me say welcome to all of those who will be joining us at a later time via podcast or YouTube. Rav Shmuley, as many of you know, likes to start the classes that he teaches with a poll. So I'm going to follow in Rav Shmuley's tradition. Our next major holiday is Shavuot, when we celebrate Zman Matan Toratenu, the season for the giving of our Torah. So here's the poll. You're standing at Mount Sinai. You hear the Ten Commandments. You hear the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. What is your reaction? 1, easy, piece of cake. 2, oh no, that's the hardest of all of them. 3, it starts out hard when I'm a child and my parents tell me all I need to do, but it gets easier as I age. 4, it starts out easy. As a child, I need to be told what to do, but honoring them as they age is harder. Easy piece of cake, 13%. Oh no, that's the hardest of all of them, 25%. It starts out hard, but it gets easier, 50%. It starts out easy, but it gets harder going on, 13%. Okay, interesting dispersion here, with the winner going to starting out hard, but getting easier. So, my autobiography, I'm squarely in the sandwich generation. My wife, Ariella, who's online, she and I have 3 children in their teens and 20s. They are emerging adults on the cusp of independence. And I've got to say, it's a really exciting time to be a parent, to see them emerge and to see them starting to formulate their lives. And there could be a whole class just on parenting emerging adults. And maybe I'll consider that for another time. But at the same time that we're in this stage of our parenting, my wife and I in recent years have spent considerable time caring for our aging parents. My wife's mother, Sheila Reback, died last June, so her first yortzeit is soon approaching, shortly after Shavuot, and I'm dedicating this teaching to her memory. Meanwhile, our other three parents, thank God they're alive, but they're not getting any younger, and we're spending time on various issues and caring for them. As we go into some sources that I'd like to study with you during the next bit of time. So on Shavuot, we read the Ten Commandments, and right smack in the middle of the Ten Commandments is Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha l'man ya'arichu yamecha al ha'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God gives you. And we have the parallel text in the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments. Basically the same thing. There's a Deuteronomic flourish that your days may be long and that it may go well with you. Laman yitav lach. There's not much to read into that aside from it being stylistic in Sefer Devarim. What is interesting in both renditions of the Ten Commandments here, in both renditions of this particular command, is that there is a reward attached to a performance of this mitzvah. You don't get this too often. Sometimes you get a penalty for not doing a mitzvah, like we just had Pesach, and if you don't eat matzah, there's a punishment involved. And we know about punishments if, say, you don't fast on Yom Kippur, but it's rare that we get a reward. And there are only two places in all of Torah that have this particular reward attached, the reward of long life. The Midrash Tanchuma picks up on this. Let's look at this text. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai taught, "For two commandments did the Holy One, blessed be He, reveal their reward. These are the lightest of the light and the weightiest of the weighty ones." The lightest of the light ones is Shiluach HaKen, sending away the mother bird from the nest. This is in Deuteronomy 22:7. And the text there says, V'ha'arachta yamim, you will lengthen your days if you do this mitzvah. So that's considered a light mitzvah. I'll explain that in a minute. The most weighty of the mitzvot is honoring parents, about which it is also written, Laman ya'arichun yamecha. A word about a light mitzvah and a heavy mitzvah. All mitzvot are important. There are 613 mitzvot, and we get credit for doing all of them. But are they easy to do or hard? Well, let's say you're walking down the road and you see a nest and you want to take the eggs, but the mother bird is there. Well, you open up the Torah, and Deuteronomy 22 verse 7 tells you exactly what to do in that situation. There's a template for the exact steps you do. You open up the book, as it were, you do the steps, you can go home with your eggs and live happily ever after with long life, because you've fulfilled the mitzvah, and whatever the moral implications are of that mitzvah, not having sensitivity to the mother in the presence of her young, you've fulfilled that. Check, you've done that. But kibud av v'ain, this is something that it takes a lifetime to perfect, and there's no handbook. We have this mitzvah here in the Ten Commandments, but the Torah is really sparing in detail. How do we go about honoring our parents? What does that entail? How do we do it? What are measures of success? How can we improve in that? We have very little to go on, and my stage of life that I'm in now, or are experiencing it now, know that it can be challenging caring for parents, going through various stages of life. So one other note about the reward. Professor Jeffrey Tigay, the great contemporary scholar on Deuteronomy, notes that in ancient Near Eastern law codes, there is explicit reference to making inheritance of parents' property contingent on honoring parents during their lifetime. Whatever that means, I haven't studied those texts, but in his commentary on Deuteronomy, the JTS edition, he notes that. So it's just something to consider. But suffice it to say, according to the Midrash, honoring parents is considered a difficult mitzvah. Let's look at where Kibud Av V'Em appears in the Ten Commandments. This is for those who can see, there's a diagram of the Shnei Luchot Habrit, the two tablets with an abstract of each of the Ten Commandments. So on the tablet on the right, you have 4 mitzvot somehow connecting to God, and God is mentioned in all of them. From the first one, I am the Lord your God, and then you shall have no gods before me, and you shall not take the Lord your God, in the name of the Lord your God in vain, and remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and it goes on to say that God rested on the seventh day in creation. So all those have to do with God. And then on the left side, you have, thou shalt not murder, you shall not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness against your neighbor, and do not covet your neighbor's wife. And so all of those are interpersonal mitzvot. So you have the mitzvot connected to our relationship with God, and you have on the other side, on the other tablet, mitzvot connected to our interpersonal relationships. And then right smack in the middle is kabed et avicha v'et imecha, honor your parents. And the rabbis of the Talmud learn a lesson from that. So here is Tractate Kiddushin 30b. This is a section of the Talmud. It's fascinating. It follows an extensive section that deals with the responsibilities of parents towards children, the job of parenting. And parents have to educate their children, even teach them how to swim, literally and figuratively. All these things. And then the sugya shifts gears to what is behind the responsibility of children and their responsibility to their parents. What goes into that? So Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught that it is stated, kabed et avicha v'et imecha, the Torah says, honor your father and mother. And it is stated in Proverbs, kabed et Hashem mehonecha, honor God with your wealth. So this is a common rabbinic mode of hermeneutics. It's a hekesh. It's taking a word that appears in one case and drawing meaning from the way that word is used in another case. So here the word is kabed, honor. And we have honor your parents in one text, and we have honor God in another. And so the rabbis learned that in this manner the verse equates the honor of one's father and mother to the honor of hamakom, the omnipresent, as the term honor is used in both cases. So there is something special about parents. There is a link to God. And the Gemara expands on that. So this past week's Torah portion, Parshat Kedoshim, has the book of Leviticus's, Sefer Vayikra's kind of version of the Ten Commandments. And there's Shabbat in there, and there's relationship to parents. There are a lot of parallels to the Ten Commandments in the priestly language, in the style of Vayikra. So here we have a verse, Ish imo v'aviv tira'u, v'yat shabtotai tishmaru ani Adonai Elokechem. You shall fear or revere, be in awe, every person of his or her mother and his father, and you shall keep Shabbat. I am the Lord your God. So there's this sense of awe of one's parents. And so Kiddushin, the Talmud, the rabbis in the Talmud explain that. So they explained Kibud Av V'Aim in light of how the Torah says you have to honor parents and you have to honor God. And there's a close parallel between those two entities, parents and God. And the rabbis do the same thing with respect to the Leviticus verse. It's stated, a man shall fear his mother and father, and it is stated, Et Hashem Elokecha tira v'oto ta'avod. That is in Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verse 13. You shall fear your God, and God you shall serve. So the rabbis say here too, the verse equates the fear of one's father and mother to the fear of the omnipresent, hamakom, mora'at hamakom. So what are the rabbis doing here? They're saying parents we have to honor and fear, God we have to honor and fear. And so the rabbis go on to say, and so too the equating of one's attitude toward the parents, equating of one's attitude toward their parents to their attitude toward God is a logical derivation, as the three of them are partners in creation. Shlosha shutafin hein ba'adam. They are the three partners in creation. You might hear your local rabbi say this at a wedding at some point, or at a bris or a baby naming. As the sages taught, there are three partners in the forming of a person: the Holy One, blessed be He, who provides the soul, and his father and his mother. When a person honors his father and mother, the Holy One, blessed be He, says, I ascribe credit to them as if I dwelt between them, and they honor me as well. Ke'ilu darti beinehem bechibduni. When you honor your parents, you are in the process honoring God. So there is this close parallel, and that's why we have that visual of Kibud Av V'Aim right smack in the middle. I mean, it's honoring people. It's on one hand an interpersonal relationship. On the other hand, it is closely connected to our relationship to the divine. Honoring parents is it. So here's a question: if honoring parents is godlike, then how we treat our parents must in some way parallel our treatment of God. As I've been preparing for this shiur, dear friend and classmate of mine from JTS, Rabbi Shai Held, published his absolute masterpiece, wonderful new book called Judaism is About Love. I highly recommend it, and I'll put in a plug. I hope VBM will soon bring Rabbi Held back to discuss his new book in more detail. In his new book, Rabbi Held notes how the relationship of God and the Jewish people are described in Jewish prayer. Before the Shema, if you're familiar with the liturgy, we say, Ahava, Rabbah, Avtanu, with great love, God has loved us. And then in response, we say the Shema, and immediately after the verse Shema Yisrael, we say Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. We say you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So God, we acknowledge that God loves us, and in response, Rabbi Held reminds us that God bids us to love God back. So God's actions of bringing the world into being and granting us life were acts of love and grace that we need to reciprocate by bringing love and grace into the world through our actions. And with respect to parents, our sources describe a similar sense of reciprocity. So there are a few things going on. One, honoring parents is a way of showing love to God directly. It's a way of actually doing Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. It's a way of loving God. But also the relationship of us and our parents parallels this reciprocity. God does for us, we do for God. Parents do for us, we do for parents. So let's look at a source here that I think explains this. There's a passage from the Talmud, Shabbat 127a, that is included in the morning liturgy. If you go way at the beginning of your Siddur, usually before the part where the prayer leader comes in at the start of the morning service, there are the blessings of Torah study, and there are passages of study, one of which is this passage from Shabbat 127, Elu dvarim she'adam ochel peirotehem ba'olam hazeh v'hakeren kayemet lo le'olam haba. These are the things that a person, when you do these mitzvot, you enjoy the fruits in this world, and you enjoy the principle, the real good stuff in the world to come. So you can kind of collect interest or dividends in this world, but you can tap into the principle in the world to come. Ve'elu hein kibud av v'em ugmilut chasadim. So honoring your father and mother, and I'll translate gemilut chasadim as acts of loving kindness. That's common translation. And the text goes on with other important mitzvot. Early attendance at the house of study, morning and evening, providing hospitality to guests, bikur cholim, hachnasat orchim, and then visiting the sick, bikur cholim, participating in making a wedding, accompanying the dead to the grave, concentrating on the meaning of prayers, making peace between fellow men and between husband and wife, and the study of Torah is equal to them all. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. So we have this category of gemilut chasadim, but then we have a whole list of a bunch of things that are considered gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. So welcoming guests and visiting the sick, and accompanying the dead, and bringing peace between people. All of those could be considered Gemilut Chasadim. However, before Gemilut Chasadim is Kibud Av V'Aim. So why is Kibud Av V'Aim listed first before Gemilut Chasadim? I believe, this is my reading, and maybe I heard this somewhere and I just can't remember the source, so I'm willing to attribute it to someone else, but I believe that Kibud Av V'Aim, honoring your parents, is the paradigmatic example of Gemilut Chasadim, or it's the ultimate expression of Gemilut Chasadim. Why do I say that? Because if you actually drill down into the words of Gemilut Chasadim, the word gamal, in this context, the verb means to pay back kindness. So why doesn't this text just say, do chesed, aseh chesed, do loving kindness, bring kindness into the world? Why does the text go out of its way to say you have to pay back kindness into the world? You have to reciprocate the kindness that you receive and bring more back. Pay it back and pay it forward. And I believe Kibud Av V'Aim is, as the rabbis intended here, is the ultimate expression of Gemilut Chasadim because it involves paying back a debt. Your parents bring you into the world, and honoring them is a way of saying thank you for the love that brought you into the world. I found some confirmation of this thesis in Sefer HaChinuch. This is a text that was composed in medieval Spain. They're around between 1255 and 1285. The author is anonymous. Some believe it's by a Rabbi Aharon Halevi, who he gave great bar mitzvah presents. This was the book Sefer HaChinuch, which is a listing of all of the 613 commandments in Torah. As he understood them, he compiled this list and gave it as a bar mitzvah gift to his son. There's a mitzvah where he talks about Kibud Av V'Aim. He says, Mishorshei mitzvah zo, shera'ui lo la'adam, sheyakir v'gmol chesed. From the roots of this commandment of Kibud Av V'Aim, honoring your parents, is that it is fitting for a person to acknowledge and return kindness to people who are good to him and not, or her, and not to be an ungrateful scoundrel, because that is a bad and repulsive attribute before God and people. And he should take to heart that the father and the mother are the cause of his being in the world, and hence it is truly fitting to honor them in every way and give every benefit he can to them, because they brought him to the world and worked hard for him when he was little. And this is a gender-specific text and translation, so I may be only reading the male pronouns, but of course we include female as well. Once one fixes this idea in his or her soul, he will move up from it to recognize the good of God, who is the cause and the cause of his ancestors until Adam Harishon, first person, Adam, and that he took him out into the world's air and fulfilled his needs every day and made his body strong and able to stand, and gave him a mind that knows and learns. For without the mind that God granted him, he would be like a horse or a mule who does not understand. And he should think at length about how very fitting it is to be careful in his worship of the blessed be he. So here, Sefer HaChinuch connects honoring one's parents to service of God, and also says that that honoring parents very much is paying back a debt. It's gemilut chasadim par excellence. It's the ultimate expression of paying back kindness. So all of this is to honoring one's parents. To go deeper into the complexity of this mitzvah, we have to ask, so what does kibud, honor, require anyway? So for this, I have some selections from the Talmud, a bunch of stories, and I'll try to get through all of them, or as many as we can. And the Talmud illustrates honoring one's parents through these telling narratives. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says they asked Rabbi Eliezer, how far must one go to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring one's father and mother? Rabbi Eliezer said to them, go and see what one Gentile did for his father in Ashkelon. And the name of the son was Dama ben Netina. Once the sages wished to purchase precious stones from him for the ephod of the high priest. So this wasn't just some random purchase. There was a very specific, important purchase in mind for the garments of the high priest. And they offered him 600,000 gold dinars profit, which is an exorbitant sum. And Rav Kahana taught that it was 800,000 gold dinars profit. So they're offering him close to, let's just say $1 million for these precious jewels. There's a problem, though. They were placed under his father's head, and the father was sleeping, and the son, Dama, was being a good son, honoring his father, and he would not disturb him. No matter how much money was on the table, he would not wake up his father, which would be dishonorable, in order to retrieve these jewels. So the rabbis lift this up as a great example of honor. And they, the story goes on. I don't have it all quoted here, but Dama gets a divine reward. He has a flock of cattle, and God blesses him with the birth of the red heifer, which was also, very important in temple times. They sacrificed the red heifer and used the ashes to purify people from the impurity of death. Very important. And he sold the red heifer to the rabbis for only the value of what they offered him for the precious stones, because he could have named top dollar for the red heifer. But the upshot is, that this Gentile man Dama was so righteous, he did not upcharge the rabbis for the red heifer that he was rewarded. He just sold it for fair market value. And they're holding him up as an example of righteousness. This is how you do kibud av va'em. Now, the rabbis compare kavod and yirah, because remember, you have those parallel texts in the Ten Commandments and in Leviticus. So they ask, Ezahu morah ve'ezahu kibud. Fear of one's father includes the following: one may not stand in one's father's fixed place, and may not sit in his place, and may not contradict his statements by expressing an opinion contrary to that of the father, and he may not choose sides when his father argues with someone else. What is considered kibud? He gives his father food and drink, dresses and covers him, and brings him in and takes him out for all of his household needs. And one can imagine these are things one does to an aging parent, a parent who doesn't have the ability to feed or provide drink for themselves, or to dress themselves, or to go out into the world, to go shopping. They need some assistance, and doing so for an aging parent is considered by the rabbis an act of kavod. Okay, the rabbis go on. There are additional narratives here. Rav Asi had an elderly mother. She said to him, I want jewelry, and he made jewelry for her. She said to him, I want a man whom I can marry. So she's widowed, and she's asking her son to help her make a match. And he says, I will seek one for you. She said to him, I want a husband who is as handsome as you. At this point, he realized that she was senile. She wasn't going to find someone who was half her age to marry, and that he would be unable to fulfill all of her requests. And here's the kicker. Therefore, he left her. This is a rabbi in Babylonia. He left her and went to Eretz Yisrael. So the rabbis are saying that one needs to care for an elderly parent with what seems to be some stages of dementia. And the rabbis are saying that there are limits. You can't be expected to do everything. And we'll see how that plays out in some later texts. There's a debate in later sources over the obligation of children to parents who have lost mental capacity, what we would call dementia. So we'll see a debate about that in a bit. But first, one more section from the Talmud that addresses the financial burden of caring for aging parents, and upon whom the responsibility lies to pay for their care. From whose funds must one give his father food and drink? Rav Yehuda says from the money of the son. Rav Natan bar Oshaya said from the money of the father. Sages gave this following ruling to Rav Yirmiyah, and some say they gave this ruling to the son of Rav Yirmiyah. The halakha is like the one who says it must be paid from the money of the father. So your parents build up a 401k. They even take out a long-term health insurance policy, for long-term care insurance in case they need to go into a nursing home. They have all of those assets, and yet there's an opinion that Rav Yehuda says that nevertheless the children still have to pay out of pocket for the health care costs of their parents. That would be a tough pill to swallow, I think, for many of us, but the rabbis, the majority of the rabbis say, no, if the parents have their own assets, you can tap into them, and therefore the child, the adult children, are not responsible. There's more to that, and you'll get this text, but I want to move on to the case of, well, what happens when dementia sets in? So Rambam, his dates are roughly 1135 to 1204. He writes in the Mishnah Torah, when a person's father or mother lose control of their mental faculties, in this case he says the son, but we can extend this to all children. Their son should try to conduct his relationship with them according to their mental condition until God has mercy upon them. Ad sheyerucham alehen. It's a euphemism for until they die, basically. Because the Rambam, who is a doctor, by the way, recognizes the difficulty of when one loses mental faculties. But the Rambam goes on, if it is impossible for him to remain with them because they have become very deranged, he should leave them, depart, and charge others with caring for them in an appropriate manner. One might interpret this as saying, if you can't care for your parents in either their home or in your home, it's okay to send them to a nursing home, to a nursing facility, where they can get a higher level of care round the clock. But Rambam's nemesis, I don't know if they ever actually met, but the Ra'avad, Rabbi Avraham ben David of Pasquier in France, takes issue with just about every single thing Rambam says. And he says this is not a correct ruling. If he goes and leaves him, who shall he command to watch him? If not the children to care for the parents, who will? Who would really provide the appropriate care that parents need in the last chapter of their lives? So the Ravad disagrees with Rambam. And, you know, it's one of those things where I think many of us can say they're both right. And say, teku, let's leave it at that. There are times where they are both right. The last segment that I want to cover, and to do justice to this would require a session all by itself, but there are cases where tragically parents commit abuse against children, and there are questions that contemporary poskim have asked, and earlier rabbis, what are responsibilities of adult children to parents who were abusive to them? There's a fascinating article by Rabbi Mark Dratch, who currently serves as executive director of the Orthodox Rabbinic Association, the RCA. He wrote in Hakira Journal an essay titled Honoring Abusive Parents. The link is in the source sheet here if you want to read the whole thing. And he quotes a contemporary posek, Rabbi David Cohen, who says that there's a reason for exempting an abused child from the obligation of honor, asserting that there are limits to how much a person is allowed to spend in order to fulfill a positive commandment, no more than 1/5 of one's monetary assets. He argues that emotional distress and psychological consequences are excessive personal costs that free one from an obligation. He maintains that halakha does not re-victimize abused children by forcing them to honor their abusers. That would be a price much too high to pay. And he goes on, and Rabbi Dratch also has a section about whether a child is obligated to mourn a deceased parent who was abusive. Is mourning for abusive parents obligatory, discretionary, or prohibited? There is no obligation to mourn for an abusive parent, Rabbi Dratch writes. If the mourning is for the sake of the memory and honor of the deceased, then an abusive parent who is classified as a rasha, an evil person, should not be mourned. And if mourning is for the sake of the living, then it is up to the children to decide in consultation with their rabbis and mental health professionals on their psychological readiness and the appropriateness of engaging in traditional mourning practices. So one may find, even if one was abused by parents, one might find a sense of closure in engaging in some sort of ritual mourning practice. And if that is the case, Rabbi Dratch says, go for it. But if not, you are not obligated to do so. But I want to just offer one liturgical text that appears in the conservative movement's Machzor Lev Shalem, the High Holiday prayer book, a Yizkor meditation in memory of a parent who was hurtful. And so, we say Yizkor on Yom Kippur and on other major holidays as we recall our departed loved ones. But what if they weren't exactly loved ones in our hearts. So this is a text written by Robert Sachs. Dear God, you know my heart. Indeed, you know me better than I know myself. So I turn to you before I rise for Kaddish. My emotions swirl as I say this prayer. The parent I remember was not kind to me. His or her death left me with a legacy of unhealed wounds, of anger and of dismay that a parent could hurt a child as I was hurt. I do not want to pretend to love or to grieve to grief that I do not feel, but I do want to do what is right as a Jew and as a child. Help me, O God, to subdue my bitter emotions that do me no good, and to find that place in myself where happier memories may lie hidden, and where grief for all that could have been, all that should have been, may be calmed by forgiveness, or at least soothed by the passage of time. I pray that you, who raise up slaves to freedom, will liberate me from the oppression of my hurt and anger, and that you will lead me from this desert to your holy place. I want to close with one other text that we read recently on the Shabbat before Pesach, Shabbat Hagadol. We read a haftarah from the prophet Malachi. And we read it because Malachi says that Elijah the prophet will return, and he doesn't say it quite this way, but basically Malachi is the first source where we get a sense that Elijah is the forerunner of the Messianic age. So that haftarah ends with, Lo, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of God. But right before that, we read, V'heshiv lev avot al banim, v'lev banim al avotam. God shall reconcile parents with children and children with their parents, so that when I come, or when the Mashiach comes, I do not strike the whole land with utter destruction. So Malachi, the prophet, is putting forward some sort of proto-vision of the Messianic age, and he could easily say that in the Messianic age the streets will be paved with gold, or that there will be an end to all wars. I mean, some of the other prophets talk about nation shall not lift up sword against nation. That is the Messianic age according to Isaiah. But according to Malachi here, what is the Messianic age? The ultimate expression of the Messianic age is the reconciliation of parents and children. So with this, this is the ultimate expression of long life, the reward that's spoken of in the Ten Commandments, love and respect that transcends generations throughout eternity. So I will pause here and open it up for any comments or questions.
Thank you so much. We have a couple minutes left. Would love to take a few questions or comments. If there are any, please feel free to raise your hands and we can call on people to unmute. And you can always write things in the chat as well. Hi, Steve.
Hi. I found that as I have gotten older, now I'm 81, my kids treat me as their child. And they're very, very protective of me, always concerned about every little detail of my life and how people are treating me. I'll give you an example. I worked in New York for 45 years. I took the doggone subway every working day for 45 years. Now, when I go visit my kids in New York, they want me to call them every single stop of the subway to let them know where I am? And can I see an S for south or an N for north? That's just an aside. The real question is, and my question is kind of unrelated. What does the word mitzvah mean? When I hear it spoken contemporaneously, I hear it in two contexts. One, mitzvah is a good deed. And two, I hear other people saying it as a commandment, a dictate, something that must be done.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I first want to just honor what you shared about the stage that you're in your relationship with your parents, and that they're monitoring your movement out of great care for you, and you're navigating that. So I just wanted to lift that up. Mitzvah literally means commandment. In our modern day Jewish parlance, particularly in the English-speaking world, we often talk about doing a mitzvah as doing a nice, kind deed. When we use it in that context, it's usually more, it would be more accurate to say chesed, to do an act of kindness. But we usually say to do a mitzvah. But literally, you are absolutely correct. A mitzvah is a commandment.
I'm having a little trouble defining honoring. You sort of explained it in some ways, and it seems like it's caring for your parents as much as you possibly can until or unless it becomes impossible. And it may be more than just that. And I'm not sure, is eating your vegetables, is that honoring your parents and that suffices, or do you have to go further than that as you age? And is there a difference in how you define honoring when you're talking about honoring your parents versus honoring God? It seems like there's a different paradigm, a different platform for those two modes of honoring somebody or something.
Yeah, so that's the complicated thing. The Torah doesn't say, this is what we mean, this is what God means by honor. Here is your working definition. It just says, kabed et avicha v'et imecha. And the rabbis of the Talmud are trying to fill in the blanks here, try to expand on that and let us know a little bit more what that is. And there was the text that we looked at. You can look in the source sheet where the rabbis compare honor and fear or awe. And there's also the text that says when you do honor to your parents, when you bring them honor, you are also honoring God in the process. I want to say one more thing. I mentioned my friend Rabbi Shai Held, and his book came out right before Pesach, and it's fascinating, and I haven't fully digested all of it. But he talks about in the book love of parents towards children, paralleling God's love for humanity. And interestingly, he doesn't go into detail about that other side of the relationship, children towards their parents. So I'm working on fleshing that out, that kavod might be a synonym of love. But there are sources that I found that say, no, kavod is different from love, and other sources that say, no, kavod is a synonym of love. And you'll at the end of the source sheet, you'll see a couple of examples on that. So that's another thing that I'm thinking about. Kavod may be a description of how to do love, and it's very complex. And we saw just from those stories how complex it is. But I'll leave it at that.
Hi, Judy, we can take one more quick question. You get the last word.
Sure. I don't know if it's a question, but Rabbi Bernstein, I would suggest that Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha is you treat them with the weightiness, because kavod also has a sense of weight.
Absolutely.
But you fulfill their needs for supplementation of what they can do on their own while preserving their honor in the world. So if a parent is incontinent, you don't yell at them, how come you can't do this? How come you can't walk on your own? You treat them like royalty, but at the same time, you provide quietly for their physical and emotional needs. And I think it also includes preserving their good name.
Beautifully stated. I cannot add anything else to your eloquent words. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning the bit about kavod being related to the word kaved, which means heavy or weighty. And that's an important link as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Bernstein, for this great presentation, and thank you all for joining us today.